Well, as we continue down this road of exploring the phenomenon of fandom, we really need to understand how we package our messaging in a way that's personalized for the audiences and how content assists in building trust and loyalty. And, there are plenty of brands and creators that I've only ever interacted with online. And actually, it's how they create content is the reason why I've built affinity over time. And I've become not just their followers, but truly fans of what they do. So as we think about how to actually cultivate fandom through content, there was exactly one person I wanted to have this conversation with, because she's quite literally the queen of content. She's one of my favorite speakers and marketing experts, and I love her so much that we are today renaming the show in honor of her. Today's episode of the Brand to FANN show stars none other than Ann Handley. Welcome to the show, FANN.
The FANN. It's a double N to incorporate today's rebranding of the FANN show.
Yeah, we've only ever done this one other time. That was episode number 2 with we named that one the Brand to FANZO show.
Oh,
so
nice.
You have now taken the title from Brian Fanzo, and now that will be yours perpetually.
Man, I know.
FANN.
If I didn't meet members of Fanzo's family, I would think that he basically just rebranded himself. But I have met other people in his family who actually share the last name Fanzo, and so I know it's not like a made-up name that he rebranded. I don't know, Fanaticalopolis or something to Fanzo, because it's legit. I mean, how perfect is that name, really?
Yeah.
Not just for you, but for him as well.
Yeah, also for him, since he's kind of literally built a business around that. But you, Ann, have built a business or a reputation. You were dubbed the world's first chief content officer. I'm wondering, when did the word content enter your vocabulary, and why did you pursue that title?
Yeah, it's fun. So actually, the chief content officer title goes back to the company I started in 1997, a company called clickz.com, which was one of the first sources of information about how to use this nascent thing called the internet to market. So yeah, that was 26 years ago. And so yeah, quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
The reason why the term content came up then, chief content officer as a title came up, was because, what my partner and I were trying to figure out, how do we actually talk about publishing and content in the construct of an online environment that gives it the import and the respect that it deserves. And so that's where the title of chief content officer came up, as literally during a brainstorm. And at the time it was almost, I mean, it's much more common now, but at the time it was like, what even is that? What does that actually mean? But when we thought about it, it made total sense, because taking content and elevating it to the C-suite, we felt like was what we were all about as a publishing company, as a newsletter, as a website that was giving information to businesses about how to use the internet to market. And so, yeah, we just felt like it just would elevate content to be something that was worthy of respect and that kind of C-suite title.
So not only were you the first chief content officer, you literally created the meaning of the word content as we all use it today.
I mean, I don't know if I was the only one who was creating it at the time, but yeah, at the time then that we invented it, we literally thought we were inventing it, and there wasn't anybody else who was using that title. I think people were using content. Some website publishers were using the word content, so I can't say that I invented the term, but I definitely think that we invented the idea that content needed to be held in, at the executive level, that needed to be respected, and that needed to be something that we needed to cherish and use in a way to connect with those we sought to engage with online.
Yeah. So you were one of kind of the early heroes of the internet. And when I think about kind of where the internet started, coming up in a generation that got to use the internet, not the whole time that I was growing up, but a significant part of that. But I think back and I'm like, oh, the first heroes were truly writers, right? And I think about being in chat rooms, reading threads, thinking about the first bloggers that I read daily. And then even as, Twitter came to life, it's 140 characters, or it was at that time of bite size. What are you doing? So words were kind of like the superhero of that, was the super medium of that. And I think as long as words ruled in social media, I did fine as the social media manager of the PGA Tour. But as time has evolved, and it feels like writing has been, don't hate me for this, but maybe writing has been a little replaced or de-emphasized in favor of video, audio, and maybe even to some extent at some point in time, images. But is that true, or does that make you sad? It makes me a little bit sad.
Yeah, I don't see it quite that way. One of the things that I find interesting about this whole conversation about the rise of generative AI tools and platforms, so things like Chat GPT, like as we've seen them sort of, cannonball into the deep end of the content pool, like what is it, about 10 weeks ago at this point, suddenly everybody's talking about generative AI and everybody's talking about writing. And so what I find interesting about that is now suddenly what words matter, words are important. When did that happen? Well, the truth is, Lauren, I don't think it ever went away. I think it's only served to emphasize how important written communication is and how important text is. And to your point, like I think that words have always carried our messages to our communities, to our fans, to our followers, to anyone we seek to engage with, to our audiences, to our customers, our prospects, all of those. And so I think it's always been the case, and that words have always been the kind of bedrock of our online communication. And even with the rise of video and the rise of audio and the rise of images, like you say, I don't see it as a binary choice. Like it's not a matter of, are we going to do a podcast like this one, or are we going to do some sort of text interview? Like chances are, and I don't know your plans, but when you publish this, I'm guessing you're going to have both, right? You're going to have the audio recording, maybe little video snippets here and there. You'll also have a text component. You'll have a landing page. You'll have a write-up of it. And so like I think the secret to me is not, text or video, text or audio, or text or images, but actually those two things and how they work together, and how both can help make for a stronger piece of content, and more specifically a stronger connection with those we seek to have as part of our community or our audience. And so that's the way that I think about it. And I don't, it doesn't make me sad as much as it makes me realize that a lot of folks have been thinking in those binary terms, when I don't think that's the case at all.
Right. I like that point in how you explained, this is, we're recording this as a podcast, but we're also recording it on video, because the Brand of Fans show, I specifically named not as a podcast, but as a show, so that I can use both parts, so that it can be on YouTube and people can get video snippets, so that they can get it wherever they're listening, so that we can do the show notes and then expanded, blog posts. And there's got that. So probably like you, most of us tend to be non-binary when it comes to these choices, yet we silo. It's this thing. So it's a podcast. It's, without kind of really giving credit to the other things that we're doing. And so I think you're right that words are always present, and they're carrying through, even if you're on video, as like to be accessible, you have to add captions. Well, if you don't go in and actually manage your captions, then it can be a bunch of gibberish that if you're, like me, I still watch things on mute, but I did it because I used to consume a lot of content with babies in my arms. And heaven forbid, you watch anything with sound and that baby wakes up, and then you have, no life for the next 45 minutes. So,
exactly. Yeah, I know. I mean, it's so funny because I don't know about you, but I don't have a baby that I'm worried about waking up, but I still access everything through captions. Like I watch mostly all of my social stuff I watch on mute. Even when I'm watching like Netflix, like I always watch with the captions turned on. Not because I'm hard of hearing, or anybody in my family is hard of hearing or deaf, but because I like the experience of being able to listen and read. And so I think of that almost as a proxy for how a lot of us are consuming content these days. It's like, even though something is video, very often we are reading it, right?
Sure.
And yeah, there are some, you do have to watch those captions though, because I shared on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago about how I produced a video for MarketingProfs, and I was talking about our what was it? It was like year-end pricing for the MarketingProfs B2B forum this fall. And what LinkedIn auto captioning heard in my video was not year-end pricing, it was urine pricing,
Ooh,
URINE. Like, like so you got to watch out. So you have to be aware constantly of, what are these words actually saying? Because yeah, you got to watch it. It can be humorous slash
absolutely.
embarrassing.
I think it's really kind of fun to see also where, by paying attention to kind of the accessible content pieces that we have now. So
Mm-hmm.
captions being one, alt text for images being another. I mean, just in this past few months, I've become aware of, well, obviously when Stranger Things season, I think we're on season 4, came out,
Yeah.
the person or the team who wrote those captions
Yes.
actually got a ton of press around
Yes.
the accessibility and the different approach they took to writing the captions that we turn on Netflix. And like you said, it's not necessarily because we have to, but by choice. What they were able to produce in those captions were so much more vivid language,
Mm-hmm.
describing not just the words, but the sounds. And it was such
Yes.
a neat experience to be able to, have that kind of immersive experience while reading as well as listening.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I did a whole talk at Content Marketing World this past fall about those Stranger Things captions and about how they were able to infuse something that most of us take for granted with a clear tone of voice that was so reflective of Stranger Things. So yeah, I love that example. Another show that does that, by the way, is Wednesday,
Okay.
also on Netflix. About Wednesday Addams, and they also do it. I love seeing that, because it's just a great example of what we're talking about here. Just, yes, the importance of words, but also using the things that so many people throw away, like so many of us in marketing just throw away. Like, we just think, oh yeah, auto captioning done, like check that box. But
Sure.
instead, what if we slowed down and just took that extra step to create a different kind of experience there? Yes, on the accessibility front, it provides a more immersive experience, but also, just kind of respects that space a little differently. And to your point, like, yeah, we were all talking about Stranger Things. I built a whole keynote around those Stranger Things subtitles. So, and would I have done that had they been pedestrian? Like, of course not. There would have been nothing to talk about. So the fact that they actually did take that step, I mean, yeah, I love that. I see those little Stranger Things opportunities everywhere.
Mhm. We talk on this podcast about how fandom is built through trust and through loyalty. And
Mm-hmm.
so, as we're talking about Stranger Things captions or the creative use of alt text to enhance kind of the delivery of an image, that kind of thing, it does make me think that just in those ways, being creative there, not being pedestrian, does build trust in a different way with an audience.
Yeah, yeah. And what I love about those Stranger Things subtitles is that it does speak to that trust component, because and that kind of insidery sort of wink to the audience, which can, makes that connection stronger, does, create that connection with a fan to a brand.
Mhm.
Is the way that those Stranger Things captions were little Easter eggs to the audience. Like, some of them had like Dungeons and Dragons references, which, right over my head. But because I'm not a fan of Dungeons and Dragons, I don't play it. I don't really know anything about it. But if you are a Dungeons and Dragons fan, and they have identified that a subset of the Stranger Things audience is very much, fans of Dungeons and Dragons, those little Easter eggs, like, were sort of insider signals to them that, we see you, and like a little wink and a nod. Finding those opportunities, I think, to grow our audience that way, to feed them that way, to show them how much they're valued. I think, like, that is like such a great component of
Mhm.
what we want to be doing as marketers. And it's such a great opportunity, I think. And, we're talking subtitles, but of course, don't be literal about it, right? Just look for those moments where you can surprise and delight and signal to your audience that, yes, we see you, we get you, we are you. Like, that's the affinity and the foundation of trust right there.
Yeah, it's still a reminder that writing is the most intimate medium, I think. I mean, I think in this business, probably since 2015, I probably wrote for the first time, this is the year of the podcast. Everybody's gonna, and now we're what, like almost 8 years, through that.
Yeah.
And it's podcasting is intimate because you're putting literally someone like real close to your brain going through your ear. But then you think of like the words that have such power. And like you're saying, it's not just about captions, it's about kind of using words in a way that is powerful to make these connections, to create these like intimate space between the writer and the reader.
Yes.
How do you see that happen, with the kind of the best brands in the world, or the ones who care the most about their fans?
Yeah. Yeah, I see examples of that all the time. And when I see them, I love them so much. Yeah, I love them so hard because it's like that's exactly the kind of thing that I love seeing and that I sort of hoard. I just when I see those, it's like, oh yes, they're doing that. I love that.
Mhm.
And I see it all the time. Like I think there's a few things that I see brands doing in a really smart way. So to your point around building this sort of community of fans versus just an audience, in the way that they execute on that in very specific ways. And so just to give you an example, I subscribe to a newsletter that's published by a hospital marketer. He essentially markets to hospitals and healthcare providers. He calls his audience hospitologists. So giving his audience a name makes it very different, right? It changes the experience. So it's not about, hello friends, which is kind of like, kind of basic, right? Instead, it's hello hospitologists. And like we've seen that kind of community signaling, I think, for a long time. Like, like Lady Gaga, the way she calls her fans little monsters. Like there's lots of examples of that, but it's so much less common in
Sure.
like hospital and healthcare communities. Just calling them hospitologists like really just sets the bar a little bit differently. And it makes me sit up a little straighter. I'm like, oh, I'm a hospitalogist. I'm part of this community. Now, I'm not even a healthcare provider, but I'm just sharing that with you because I subscribe to his newsletter. Why? Because I love his voice. I love the way that he feels like a real person speaking to this community of hospitologists that I feel part of because I care about it, even if I am a little bit adjacent to that community. And so I think there's little ways that we can signal as brands to our audience. That's just one quick example. But,
Mhm.
giving them a name, communicating in a way that feels like they can sense the person behind the brand writing. So for example, in email newsletters, I think there's such an opportunity there. Lauren, I'm like all in on email newsletters. The past
Yes, you
couple of
are.
years I've been like talking about them until I just we could spend the next hour talking about email newsletters, but I think that's a great opportunity to really leverage that space in a very different way, in a much more intimate way. Because as you said, like the words that we're using there have the opportunity to carry more intimate messages, and the vehicle is one person, one inbox, one time. And so how can we think about that in a much more considered way?
Yeah, I'm going to put a pin in that because you've actually said two things in that last response that I want to go back to. So we will come back to the newsletter because trust me, I am going to fangirl about all over that. But you mentioned something briefly about finding your voice. And I've heard you on a handful of podcasts recently in preparation for this. And I thought that this is a really interesting piece because it's something that truly, like, I have struggled with even producing the podcast, and from episode 1 to episode 6 to episode 12, where I feel more comfortable kind of almost getting out of keynote speaker voice and into conversational tones in even in just different things. And I realized very quickly, oh, it's going to make me a way better speaker. It's going to make me a way better writer. It's going to make me a way better person. And I also don't know if it's like, I'm almost 40, so I DAGF anymore, like, or whatever. But I feel like, I chose really bold graphics for this show. I have now set my calendar link to a shortened link that says call me maybe. Right. So like I've created some ways to actually shine like that kind of ridiculous part of me through.
Yeah.
In what way, in both like writing and speaking, do you think that marketers and creators can strip away some of bravado and find their voice faster, or is there probably no shortcuts and you have to kind of do the work and let it happen over time?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think that, I guess the first thing I would say is I don't think it's about finding your voice, because it's already there. Like, you already had your voice, it was inside of you.
Mhm.
You just had to sort of strip away the layers and let it come out. You had to figure out, like, do I feel confident enough? Do I feel safe enough? Am I willing to be a little vulnerable, like putting some stuff out there that people might not find, like, quote unquote professional or as buttoned up as they might expect from me, as a strategist. And so I don't think it's about finding. I think it's about um, I think it's about what's the word I'm trying to think of? Engaging your voice a little differently in evolving it and giving yourself permission, but also, gaining the confidence to do that, to let your voice ripen and evolve, and then sharing it externally. There may be some shortcuts, Lauren, but I don't know any. Like, the only, like, I get this question a lot, like, what are the tips and tricks to writing? And it's like, what the tips and tricks are? You show up and you do it, and you get, kicked around a little bit, and you figure out what works, what doesn't, what works with my audience, and then you iterate from there. It's just like if someone were to ask a trainer at a gym, like, what are some shortcuts I could take to, you know yeah, getting incredibly buff, or like, how can I, here it is February, how can I run the marathon in April? And it's like, well, good luck. You've got to do the work. You've got to put in the reps in order to gain the strength and the muscle and the stamina. And I think the same is true of writing. Part of me feels like we do this disservice to writing when we make it seem like it's a precious thing that, only a few can do super well. I don't think that at all. I think we're all capable of, at least, maybe not great, but at least ridiculously good writing, if we put in the reps, if we do the work. um, and so, just to go back to your voice question a minute ago, it's like, I do think it's about finding finding the confidence within yourself, developing the confidence within yourself, not finding your voice, but really instead evolving your voice is a better way to think about it. And to me, that really does come from showing up and doing the work. The way you sounded in the first episode of this podcast is probably feels a little stilted and a little uncomfortable, like when you go back and listen to it now. Like, when I go back and read the very first issues of my email newsletter, which I started 4 years ago, or even when I go back and read the first edition of my book, part of the reason why I rewrote the entire second edition of the book is because I didn't sound the same at all. Because why? I had
Wow.
been putting in the reps for the past 8 years. My voice evolved. So I had a voice then, but it is much richer and deeper now. It is more me, if that makes sense. I have stepped into it much more fully. Now, part of it is because, yeah, I was going to say that I don't give an F, but it's not that. It's more that I do care. I think it's the
Yeah.
opposite of that now that I think of it. I think it's because I do care, and I really want people to pay attention and listen, and I want to help them, and I want them to feel more inspired and confident. And so I guess it's the opposite of that. And so, as a result of that, I've gotten more and more like almost a sense of urgency in
Oh,
my
I love that. I
communication.
think that that is really so strong to say. It's really not about not caring. And that is a kind of a thing that's easy to put on the wall, right?
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
give, but it's actually when you do truly care that you want to show up in lots of different ways and be in a way. And I think that that is that authentic self that attracts and kind of helps tip from like the followers, the
Mm,
subscribers of your
mm-hmm.
newsletter to I got to buy the next book. I'm going to reply when she asks me to. I'm going to show up and watch
Yeah,
Ann speak, that kind of thing
yeah,
that
yeah,
because you have a more authentic presence.
yeah. Yeah, and then I just wanted to pick up on one thing you said a second ago too, around, actually, two things I wanted to chat about. Number one was when we talked about, you asked about speaking, and I think that's slightly different. So let's talk about that. But the second thing is, I think in marketing we need to evolve those metrics too. because, one of the things you just said a second ago is like, people feel connected to me. And so they will show up for me however I ask. Like, they'll reply to email newsletters, they will buy books, they will come to see me speak, whatever the case may be. And like, while that is true, I think if we think about that from a marketing standpoint, like, what are the metrics we can put in place to measure this kind of conversation that we're having very differently with fans than we would be just measuring a signal from an audience? So maybe we need to do things like maybe not think about just click-through rates. Maybe instead we want to measure something like how many people write back to us in an email newsletter. I literally track that metric for my own email newsletter. I call it my open to write back rate. Some email newsletter platforms do track that metric for you. They call it the response rate or the RR. But I like my open to write back rate better, because it's just like, I track it manually because my email provider doesn't offer that, at least not yet. So I guess what I'm saying is I think we need to think about what are those metrics of engagement, or what are those metrics for fandom, that we can think about to get us to where we want to be, which is building that trust and affinity with an audience. So that's the first thing. But then the second thing, just your speaking thing, at least for me, my own experience with finding my voice on stage, it's been a little bit different than finding my writing voice, because in writing, I choose every word so carefully, and I polish it and I rewrite it and I get it to the point where it feels very conversational and very natural, but it's only through like the third and the fourth draft of a piece of writing that I can get it to that stage. Speaking on stage is a little bit differently, because I had the opposite problem where I was so locked into saying things a certain way and using certain words that I had to do the opposite. I had to let go of the words on stage and just be much more conversational. And so, yeah, it was a different process for me, just in terms of how do I become more comfortable on stage and relatable on stage, is actually letting go of the words and not worrying about it quite so much, as opposed to writing. I am very, very aware, and I pay attention like to an obsessive level about the words that I'm using. So to me, it's kind of different, but they're also kind of different processes, which is why, by the way, that it drives me crazy when people say that you should just write as you talk, because I could not disagree more. So I think they're two totally different things.
I think you're right. I think that there is a difference, and it needs to be different, and there's different processes for getting that out. And what happens is, naturally, we express ourselves really, really naturally in one way. Like I found, like one medium will come really, really easy to us, and others we have to work much harder at. So it does make sense that you need a different approach to do that. So, and I think as I look at the evolution of social across my career, and coming in as a writer and saying like, I can do words and I can talk about golf in 140 characters and I can do these things. Well, then thankfully some tools popped up that we could put words on photos, and the PGA Tour did that. And then I had to hire someone who did Photoshop, because I didn't really do Photoshop. And then now if you look at a content team for a league or a team like the PGA Tour, there's 20, 30 people contributing, and this social thing is just part of everybody's job, no matter what kind of content they're creating. So, but I think that's also hard as someone who is, to be a generalist and kind of do everything really well can be really hard. So I feel like a marketing team can lean on some strengths and lean on what comes natural for people.
Yeah.
So, well, I think we could have so many more conversations like this. I think we've got now one bookmarked on the newsletter. We got one bookmarked on changing the metrics of affinity and how we measure that. I think that is such a cool thing. It's something that I've thought about in the work that I've done with advising clients. And it's why we actually separated out a bucket of like amplification metrics away from other activity, away from what's in applause. Because for me, it's always been about amplification. Who's sharing your content? Who's using your hashtag without you asking them to? Who is doing the thing with your content, after you put it out into the world? And I've always thought that amplification has been a true measure of affinity, much more than, say, attention.
Yeah, I like that. There's a step before that, isn't there too? Because You know, it reminds me of like, I'm sure you've had this experience where you're sitting in an audience and you're watching a speaker on stage and they will share something on stage that it's like a tweetable moment kind of thing. And then sometimes they'll even like encourage you to like tweet this out. And I always bristle at that slightly because to me, it's a signal that you care more about that person's audience than you do about that person, you know? And so I think you're right in terms of the amplification. I think it's good to be aware of that. But at the same time, like to me, the foundation of that is your relationship with that creator before they share it with their audience, right? So like that's the relationship that I am very, very interested in just feeding as much as I can. So that's why I look at things like the open to write back rate. That's why I look at things like one of the other metrics that I look at, and I just got one this morning, is when somebody changes jobs, do they sign up for my newsletter again? And do they let me know? And somebody this morning just said, yeah, you know, she got laid off but she wants to make sure that she keeps getting my email newsletter. Now, I track that anecdotally, but to me, those are really important signals because it's a relationship with one person who is now carrying me into a different community as she moves through the world. You know, the other thing that I track is how many people how many folks are letting me into their personal inbox. You know how we all have that like personal inbox that we protect from. And like when we shop on Amazon, we don't like, or like any brand, we don't use that email address, that secret email address. That's the email address that I want, you know, and people will write and tell me, oh, I want to make sure I keep getting you. So I'm going to give you my secret personal email address. And I'm always like, yes, that's the one that I want. So looking for those opportunities, you know, we're again, looking at the metrics a little differently, but also like, to me, like that person amplifying, ultimately it's because they love me. That is like, that's what's informing them amplifying, right? So that's what I like to focus on.
And what have you discovered about fandom by creating and also committing to your newsletter? Like you said, it's 4 years old, Total Anarchy. I know you have over 50,000 subscribers. And if they're anything like me, I mean, I have an email folder of past editions that I just can't help, but I can't delete. I have to save them and do that. What have you learned about that relationship with your audience and maybe about fandom through the newsletter process?
Yeah, it's a little bit like what we've been talking about, that instead of focusing on a subscriber's ability to share it, incentivizing them to share it in some way, or like you see a lot of newsletters do this, like incentivizing them to like earn rewards by, you know, sharing it with other subscribers or getting other folks to like sign up for. Like, I think all of those programs are, you know, potentially good, and I know that they often can work, but for me, they don't make sense because I don't want to incentivize people who aren't inspired otherwise to share something. So again, that foundation with a subscriber. I mean, I think Seth Godin said it probably like a million years ago, but thinking about serving that one person, that small audience of one, is ultimately the much stronger of an engine of growth than it is to think about how do I get in front of 500 people. I would rather one person be super passionate about what I'm doing than have 500 people who are kind of like, meh, who aren't saving my newsletter, who aren't writing back, who aren't giving me their super secret email address, who don't have a relationship with me, you know? And so, you know, I get the message or the question a lot of like, yeah, but how do you scale that? Well, I mean, it scales over time, but I also, it's like I focus on that one person at one time. When they write back to me after a newsletter goes out, I write back to them. And does that take time? Sure, it takes like a couple of seconds, you know, but it's worth it because that's the foundation of a relationship, and that's what makes them recommend me to others. So yeah, I mean, I think it's paradoxical. Like, instead of focusing on fans, I focus on fANN.
I really like that. So that even narrows that down into, you know, it's not a persona, it's not a demographic, it's not this random audience out here, but it's, you know, you're writing back to me and that means something to me personally. Therefore, I have a whole email inbox of Total
Yeah, and it's
Anarchies
like you're
that I
not the
refer
only one.
back
Like,
to.
Yeah, my friend Gary, who I think I met him on Instagram. I've ultimately met him like at Social Media Marketing World in person. So I do know who he is. I've had a conversation with him, but he's another one. He has a whole he has a whole folder that has my emails in it. And typically on every other Sunday when he gets my email newsletter, he'll share a nugget with his Instagram
Mhm.
community. I always say thank you to him. Sometimes I'll repost it on my story if it's not too embarrassing, so um but yeah, that kind of thing. I mean, I think it's just so valuable. And when I think about like community, like I don't know how to be personal with community, but I do know how to write to Lauren, or I know how to write to Gary, or any other person who happens to be on my list. And inherent in that is I have to know who's on my list, like at least in the general sense. So that's why when somebody signs up for my email newsletter, I ask them two questions. Number one, how did you find me? Essentially, like what brought you here? And that signals to me who my influencers are, who is recommending my work, what platform they're seeing me on. So it allows me to kind of hone my strategy that way. But the second thing I ask them is, what did you hope to learn here? And that tells me literally, what do they hope to learn
Mhm.
here? How do they see me? What do they see me as a resource for? And it allows me to, again, like hone the content generally. So I always say thank you, thanks for subscribing, whatever. But those are signals like for who is recommending me, what the content will be, and it allows me to iterate and evolve the content over time. Like sometimes I'll get randos, of course, like we all do, and they're like, oh, I'm hoping for some SEO information. I'm like, dude, you're in the wrong place, this isn't what I do. But welcome anyway. I hope you get some value out of it. So you will get those people that you just know are kind of outside of the subject that you talk about, the audience you serve, and those that you seek to bring into your community of fans. But it's and that you'll learn over time. But if I was getting maybe 100 people a week who are saying, oh, I want to learn about SEO, then obviously I'm doing something wrong, right? I'm not signaling in a way that what this email newsletter is all about. So
That's
yeah,
true.
it's really helpful just in terms of knowing what you're projecting, what they think your expertise is. It's just a way to hear back. It's a feedback loop essentially.
Yeah. And I think that's really valuable in that we don't always ask a lot of questions. We
Mm-hmm.
assume we know things about our audience,
Yeah.
or we use some third-party data or some anecdotes, but that kind of ongoing, what do you want? What do you expect from this? Or what are you hoping to learn? Is probably also over the last 4 years, has those responses probably have changed as you
Yeah.
both honed your message and the
Yes.
world's kind of changed around us.
Yes, exactly. And that's allowed me to keep pace with it. Like, can you imagine if I only asked with the very first issue, then that would be like, I don't
Sure.
know what I would still be doing here. I would no longer be relevant. And so it allows you to evolve and be relevant to your audience. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about generative AI and how that's going to impact writing and how it's going to impact marketing more broadly. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I started getting answers to that question of what do you hope to learn here? And people were like, I really want to get into copywriting, or I want to be in content writing, but I don't know, is this a good time to be into it? Because, our robots just going to write for me. So how does that play out in my email newsletter? Well, it informs the content because I know that's kind of a low level anxiety with at least some of my audience. And I think, you know what, yeah, that's a low level anxiety with me too. So let's talk about that.
Sure.
So it's the kind of thing where it helps inform the content and also tells me like what do people see me as an expert on. So yeah, I just think it's an invaluable tool. But you're totally right. Like I think in marketing we do tend to think about personas. It's like, oh, I have a sense of who we are marketing to, but are you actually developing that relationship with maybe those people who are directly in your audience? Not just people that maybe you go to a trade show and you meet them on the floor, but finding those moments to interact with them directly. Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, I don't know, I have 50,000 people on my list and I'm still able to find a few seconds in my day to do that. And so I guess I would challenge marketers to look for those moments as well. They're there, and if you encourage them, they're there.
Yeah, and low key plug for both MarketingProfs and the B2B forum. I'm somewhere from last summer and last year's online event, I talked about this, putting yourself in your audience's shoes
Mhm.
and really unpacking their questions and their needs and their feelings and everything about them at different stages of their interaction in their relationship with your
Mhm.
brand or with your service. So if you are a MarketingProfs member, I think you can find that in the pro library. I hope.
Yes. Yes. And it should be there. Yeah, I would imagine it still would be there.
Good.
Of course,
And I
having said
can,
that, watch me, it's not there. But now let's just say it. Let's just
we'll
do it,
find it.
Lauren. It's
If
there.
not, yeah, it's there. If not, maybe Ann will have me back to do it again.
We'll totally have you back. Yes, we'll figure out something.
Okay. I could talk to you all day long, but I know that's not productive for you necessarily. So I'm going to wrap this one up with the 3 questions we ask every guest on the
Mhm.
Brand of Fan show before you get out of here. And generally, what are you a fan of right now, other than kale salads, which is in your bio?
Love kale. I'm literally obsessed with it. My family's like, oh my God, not kale again. Yeah, kale again. I love kale salad. I don't know what it is. I just like can't get enough of it. Um, what am I a fan of? Just in my life generally? Does it
Sure.
have to relate to marketing at all?
No, not at all.
My goodness. I'm a fan of this little nugget right next to me, who is my Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. His name is Augie. He's 2 years old, 2.5, almost. So yeah, I'm a massive fan of his. Let me see what else. I love almost any kind of writing. It's like people ask me often, like, what's your favorite book? My favorite book is the one I'm reading right now, because if I don't like it, then I just abandon it. It's just like I just like get out. Um, so yeah, right now I am reading a book called Flight Path. Fantastic book by Barbara Kingsolver. It's a couple years old. Um, so yeah, I'm a fan of great writing. What else am I a fan of? Man, I love being outdoors. I have a rule where I'm outdoors for 1 hour every day, no matter the weather, no matter what's going on. So it's my 1 hour of just rebalancing and connecting to myself, because we live in such an online world.
Mhm.
You know, the rest of the time I might be scrolling LinkedIn or scrolling Instagram, but 1 hour a day I'm completely just like out in the world. And I gotta say, Lauren, it was really tough this past weekend because it was so cold outside in Boston, but I did it.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
impressed. Yeah, to be outside an hour a day in the Boston area in New England is not an easy feat.
Yeah, every day. Yeah, I mean, there have been like maybe a handful of times in the past couple of years where I've just been like not able to do it. But yeah, I mean, I leash up my dog, I go for a walk, and then just like be with him in the backyard, just kicking around. It's like I feel like I need that connection. I need to be moving my body outside. I need that connection to the world just to feel like I'm kind of balanced in any kind of way. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that.
Well, I am a big fan of yours. Next question. What is your favorite jersey or piece of fan wear that you have in your closet? And I know as a New Englander, you've got to have an allegiance to one of those teams up there.
Oh my goodness. You know, I'm just really not a big sports person, which is like so embarrassing being from New England and just not really being a big sports person. But I do love a good Red Sox game just because I love the experience of going to a Red Sox game. And I do have a Red Sox jersey that I wear to games. And so I think that that would have to be it.
Love that. And how can the Brand of Fan show audience keep up with you and follow your work?
So you can follow my work at annhandley.com. You can sign up for the newsletter we've been talking about, which comes out every other Sunday at annhandley.com/newsletter. You can follow me on Instagram, or you can follow me on LinkedIn. I am not on Facebook, although I still have an account there. I just am not active at all. So you can forget about that one. But the other two I am fairly active on.
Very cool. We will put all those links in the show notes for this and every show on the Brand of Fan show. And before I let you go, I'm going to just try to tie a little bow around our conversation for
Okay.
those people who maybe heard the intro, heard a little bit in the middle, got here to the end. Today on the Brand of Fan show, we are talking about the importance of content. And you talked about how writing is maybe back in the spotlight again because of the rise of generative AI, which is interesting. But I love how you said that words have always been important and have always been the vehicle that carried our messages to communities. When we talked about really finding your voice, either as an individual or a marketer, you remind us that we don't have to find our voice. We actually have to find the confidence to bring our voice out into the world. And that only happens by showing up and doing the work and allowing yourself to iterate. And the other thing that I thought was fascinating was talking about them changing how we approach measuring the activity around affinity. And you gave really great examples about how you use these kind of anecdotal or metrics you personally calculate to discover how your audience is letting you into their day-to-day and their personal space. And the thing that I'm going to take away from this is how you really focus on serving the audience of one to build a foundation with a relationship with each and every person, which means that you're not out to cultivate fans generally, but focused on the singular fan, whether that's in your inbox or someone you have in your head while you're writing to them. And I think that's just so beautiful.
That's really well done. Man, you just like took a 40-minute conversation and just zeroed in on the key points. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure to have you. You will find more about Ann Handley on the brandofan.show. If you like this episode, please use some of that amplification, share it with someone, like, subscribe. And yeah, I think that's it. I lost my train of thought. So we're just going to sign off from there.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ann. I really appreciate it.